an image comes to mind that can actually also be connected to today. There are days when there's a lot of fog, rain, and the image that comes to me is like driving. It happened to me, having to drive on a road with many, many curves in thick fog at night without the white lines on the road. And my experience is that it was very, very tiresome. What happens is if you don't have references on the road, it's difficult to see where you're supposed to go. So one needs to put a tremendous amount of effort to not run off the road. That same road, you do that same road the next day on a sunny day, there's no effort needed at all. We have sunny days. We have our own inner days full of sun where you see the horizon clearly in front of us, where finally we have days like that. But not all days are the same. We have days just like outside, the outside weather, where we have clear sunny days where we see the horizons. Other days we can't see farther than the tip of our nose. And what happens is when we have a day, let's call it a sunny day within, where there's clarity, as I said before, where you see clearly the horizon, where you have a clear view of things. One doesn't have to worry so much. When one has this experience, one is able to act coherently within one's own worldview, according to one's own values and principles. One is able to follow them well. The problem happens when we have those foggy, dark, inner stormy days. And when we have that inner storm, we lose perspective. We can't see very far the horizon. Maybe we know where we want to go more or less, but we can't find our way. And we see only what is very close to us. We see the immediate future. And in seeing only the immediate future, we try somehow to get out of that state. We want to escape from the fog, get out of the state in which we find ourselves. And not having a wider, more ample perspective, we end up reacting. And sometimes we even create situations. We take roads that normally we would never take to justify wanting to get out of that state. I don't know if this is all clear. Let me explain myself better. Once in my life, something happened that really touched me deeply. I was on the train. I was going to meet someone. It was an important meeting. It was an important moment for the center, and I was going around trying to resolve certain things. I went to this meeting, which it was wonderful, and so I was on the train, and it was the first time I had gone to this city. This is 1997, 98, 99, somewhere around that time. At a certain point, I knew it was time to get there. I felt like I was late. I was about to get on the train, and I see the name of the city where I was supposed to get off. And for a moment, I thought, oh, this is the city that I was supposed to get off. But the train didn't stop, and without thinking twice about it, I had this impulse of jumping. I needed to get off here. What can I do to get off here? And then I sort of I woke up from a kind of dream. I said, "What are you doing?" And this is the only time I had this memory of having this reaction. Like at a certain point, oh, I can't jump because I'd hurt myself. It's more important to not hurt myself than to get to the station at a certain time. No, those logical thoughts just evaporated. I was ready to jump off the train, but actually 2 minutes later, the train stopped because the train station was actually just outside the city, and the other station that we saw must have been the old station. But when we have, but what can I do if I lose clarity? If I lose, what happens if I lose the so-called control of myself? We do things that we would normally never do. I remember Lama Michel Rinpoche that would say every once in a while, when someone was taken strongly by his own mental defilements, be it desire or anger or dissatisfaction, arrogance or hate or any other mental defilements, when they're taken strongly, he would call them a kind of oracle, losing a sense of themselves. It's the oracle of anger, it's the oracle of attachment, it's the oracle of jealousy. And I think we all have had experiences where with our head we're telling ourselves, no, I shouldn't do this, but we do it anyway. Even something like not eating too much chocolate, or things that are much more difficult, complex, etc., can be connected to desire or connected to aversion. Normally, these are the two forces that guide us. But is it possible to always live a sunny day? Yes, if you've reached a certain state, inner state. Otherwise, most of us, what happens is we have sunny days, and then we have stormy days, we have foggy days, we have all kinds of inner days. It's not all stable. And I think, according to me, I think it's very, very important that when we have that sunny day, when we see things clearly, the days that we see clearly the road, we need to really set those white lines on the roads. It's during the sunny days that we need to, how can I say, we need to use tools like safety measures so that we're sure that when we have a foggy day, we will see clearly these reference points. So we put reflectors on the road so that we can see at dark, or white, these white lines. And this another time I was driving on a similar road at night, and there was a tremendous amount of fog, and I remember that I was driving, and there was only these white lines on the roads, and I could only see a few meters ahead of me, but I was able to drive. And that's why this image of these two experiences come to my mind. So when we have a clear day, what's important is to get out of the car and paint those white lines so that when there will be those dark, foggy, stormy days, we don't run off the road. We clearly see our direction. These white lines, these are our values, these are our principles. The rules that we apply to our own lives, the rules of conduct. where we say, this we should do, this we shouldn't do. Why is there the rule to not do something? Because sometimes we want to. And even if I'm in living a stormy, foggy day and I run off the road, it's not beneficial. I end up hurting myself. Something that I've seen, and I think it's quite important for us, with an act of affection towards ourselves and also towards others, we should recognize our weaknesses, recognize our limits, recognize our weaknesses, and protect ourselves from our weaknesses so that we can little by little reinforce ourselves and rid ourselves of these weaknesses. But as long as they're there, I can't pretend that they're not. So I think that each one of us, we know how to recognize our foggy days, days of rain, days of storm. When we're taken strongly from these emotions, these mental defilements, very often what we're looking for is to pacify what we feel inside. Because that feeling of anger, of hate, of resentment is not a pleasurable experience where we never say, "Ah, how wonderful, I'm feeling angry." No, it's really unpleasant. That inner feeling of dissatisfaction, of strong desire, is it pleasurable or unpleasant? If it were pleasurable, it would be enough just to want something. We would be in front of something, we'd say, oh, how wonderful it would be to have this. We'd never need to buy it. But actually, the stronger that our desire is for something, stronger that inner feeling is of malaise. So often one wants to get that object, not for the object in itself, but to eliminate that strong desire. Is that clear? So what happens is when we have a sensation of malaise, be it inner sensation that comes from dissatisfaction, strong desire, or some kind of aversion, hate, anger, we try to find a way to eliminate that feeling, that inner malaise. And it's part of our nature that every time that there's some kind of malaise, we want to eliminate it. Our own malaise, those of others, it depends. But we recognize our own malaise. And we try, when we have this inner sensation of pleasure or of pain, we try to find a coherence between what we feel and the world that we live outside. Or rather, when something, for example, if we hear something, we ask ourselves, why am I hearing this? Or when we feel something, we look around and say, why am I feeling like this? Let's say that I have a malaise that's caused by let's say, a strong aversion to this bottle. So there's this feeling of pain, of malaise, and I think that my malaise is caused by the bottle. So what can I do to be free of this malaise? I need to get rid of the bottle. Okay? And the stronger this feeling is, the stronger is the violence, the aggression towards the bottle as a reply to this inner feeling and this desire to want to be free of this malaise, if I have a strong sense of desire and I feel that my malaise is caused by the lack of the bottle, then I project my happiness onto getting the bottle and I'll do everything possible to get it. The problem in doing anything, be it for caused by attraction or aversion, we end up doing things that are not good for us. And there are other prices to pay, like jumping off a train. I would have gotten to that station, but all broken, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to go to the appointment that I had. So this image comes to my mind. It's said a couple of times that when sometimes we have this malaise, to get rid of that pain, we're used to throwing away also positive things. This example's a little strong, but it's said it's like a baby, where you're bathing the body, and then when you need to throw away the bath water, you throw away the baby. It's throwing away the baby with the bath water. Like there's a situation, there's a part of that situation, and I'm not living that part well, and to get rid of that experience, I get rid of the entire experience. I don't know if you've lived something similar. This is something where we need to be careful in general. But understand this dynamic where, unfortunately, when we're taken by these strong emotions, the stronger they are, the higher the probability that we will act in a negative way, in a way that we would never act if we weren't taken by these negative feelings. Something else we do too is the stronger the mental defilements are, the stronger we create a narrative to justify what we're feeling. So we're wonderful at justifying what we do. When we're taken by our emotions, we can find 1,000 different justifications. And it's interesting here with these justifications is that for someone who's very logical, and in these times we all want to be very logical, but this logical process works based on assumptions. And what happens is when we're taken by a strong emotion, attraction or aversion, we rely on certain assumptions as a basis for our logical process, which seems to work, but it's all based on things that are not coherent necessarily. If you take away that basis, everything falls apart. So, what do? When there are foggy, dark days, stormy days, we try to resolve that state of malaise caused by attraction or aversion, and we're ready to act in a way that normally we wouldn't. Even giving ourselves creating a kind of justification for it all, a whole narrative, a kind of coherence, which is actually not coherent at all. Because at the end of the day, we have values. For example, violence. We all know that it's not good. What we live badly ourselves, we know that it's not good for others. This is natural. But we find ways to justify, to using a verbal or physical aggression. So what's important is the many important things, but one fundamental point, when Buddha taught all the Dharma, he divided, it was divided after. It said that his teachings are divided into three parts. There's a part of the view where one studies, analyzes, reflects upon reality, how things are. What are the causes of suffering? What are the causes of happiness? What is suffering? What is happiness? What is the mind? What am I? What is reality? We can spend hours and hours talking about the world view according to Buddhism, but that wasn't enough. It's not that he said once you've understood this, then you're fine. No. Once you've understood this paradigm, and having understood is a little bit like being on a sunny day where everything's clear. At that point, we need to put down the white lines. We need to put the reflectors on the road so that it's clear even on a dark, foggy day. And here we talk about rules of conduct, vows. What purpose do they have? Their purpose is to protect ourselves from behaviors that are unhealthy. But that on a stormy, dark day, we could have this tendency of doing those things. When we say, there's so many vows, don't kill, for example. The vow to not kill. One says, well, when do I ever kill another being? You don't kill as long as you're not in a situation where that darkness, that context would bringing you to thinking that killing would be a solution for you. And when you're living that situation, what would you do? You would create a whole justification to kill. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't follow an incorrect. No, don't have a sexual misconduct. Don't create division among people with your speech. There's so many vows. Don't talk about don't criticize others. As it said, don't talk about the lacking qualities of others. Or just mind your own business. Don't think about other people's business. There's so many vows that exist. Why do these vows exist? Because on dark days we're looking for a direction, so we need to have clear signs of where to go. Buddha used this word, morality, in Tibetan is used sem sung, and the definition is the mind protection, like a guardrail. It's there to make sure that we don't run off the road, that we don't get off the path. And it's interesting because these guardrails, as long as we respect them, it runs smoothly. I don't know if it's clear, but the day that we don't respect this barrier, then I need to build up everything. So if I run off the road and go through the guardrail, it's not that I can just get back on the road as if nothing had happened. I need to rebuild my protection. I know that we're living a particular moment where we see so much violence. this is a moment we have a view of the world like within time. It is really quite restricted. Our reference of time is basically the length of our own lifetime. But I'm convinced that every entity, the more complex it is and the bigger it is, then its processes are slower. When I say entity, uh, a, a person, a family, a society, a country, a government, these are entities that we create collectively or individually. And everything that is born, everything that's created, sooner or later dies. Everything's in constant transformation. But our planet is an entity. Our solar system is an entity. But what happens is that time is much longer. The process is much longer. We have this tendency of looking through our own perspective of time. When we look, when we try to have a more macro view, my sensation is, when we do a kind of, we when you zoom out, you can see both sides. You can see past and future. And when you start to look at the past, it's space, because clarity. What I know about the past is what I'm able to imagine based on the information that I've received so far. That's it. And on this, I remember the book of George Orwell, 1984. If I remember, I read it in English. There was the Ministry of Lies. They would rewrite the past every day. They would say the past is not what happened, but what everybody remember. And it's what we do in our society with our history books. What happened is what we're told, and what actually happened, we don't know. Even this present moment depends on how you look at it. Imagine looking at the past. But even if it's like this, looking at history, looking at the past, this helps us to have a better perspective of the future. This is just a side note, a quick side note, but the point is we see so much violence, things that bring uncertainty. I'm talking up for myself. I think this is relative to all of us. We were raised in a context where a generation where war seemed like something of the past. Instead, today we see that it's very present in our Western European view. And the wars have always been, but they were quite far from our own reality. Let's say that with the beginning of the war in Ukraine and the other conflicts, and in this moment, the conflict in Gaza, this brings us to an inner feeling of instability, uncertainty. I don't know if you share these same ideas, feelings. And in front of this, without getting into the story of the conflicts and the why and the how, personally, I have this feeling often that it's like a metaphor. It's a little bit like, it's like going to the doctor. It makes me smile a little bit, because I talk about someone who's gone to the doctor, and then I say, "How are you?" They explain all these technical aspects. No, because my, all these chemical values of my blood test, if it's to someone who doesn't understand any of that, what I see is even if I'm going to give technical explanations about what is happening in my body and I don't have the complex view of everything, I mean, yeah, we try to have some kind of technical explanation because this and that and this other thing and my blood levels are, but when actually I'm just speaking for myself. Um, it's good to try to understand things, but it's it's important for us to feel like we've understood that we're doing the right thing. But if we really look into it, I'm talking for myself, not having studied medicine, it's not that I really understand what they're telling me. That's why it's important to entrust ourselves to someone really trustworthy. So similarly, we have this tendency to talk about certain things as if we had a clear idea of all the aspects, as if we were experts. If we understand just 1% of the situation, that's already a lot. We have this tendency to say this is like this without understanding, without having the knowledge of history and all the aspects. I remember once I was in a particular situation. There was a conflict, quite strong conflict, external, social, and I found myself on both sides actually, not for 1 or 2 days, but I found myself, and I lived for 12 years in a in a refugee camp, in a Tibetan refugee camp in India, and then I've also been to Tibet for 10 years, studying. So I saw many different points of view, and I had the clear idea, this understanding that truth can be found between the truths, because each one has his own truth. And when we go to see within each truth, there is a direct line, there is coherence, a straight line. But when you go to the other side, even there too, there's coherence and logic, direct line. Like the story, a family asks for advice and asks. At first, it's the wife who complains, then the husband complains, and the wife says that he does this and he did that, and the man says yes, you're right, and then the husband goes and says, no, you have no idea, my wife, she did this, she did that, and he tells his old story, and this man says, yeah, you're right, and then they go together, and they say, we can't both be right, and then he answers, you're right. Very often, to have a clear view, we need to see everyone 360 degrees, see the various truths, to be in the center. You need to be in the center to look this side, that side. If you look at all the sides, you find yourself in the middle, because it's the only point where you have a wider, clearer view. And I think this is generally very important. For example, when there's a conflict and we have this tendency to go to one side. When I talk about conflict, I'm talking about even simple daily conflicts at home, at work, because conflicts are not just wars. We find them a little bit everywhere. And when there is a conflict, we want to have a clear view about that conflict. It's important to listen and to know and to see others that think differently than us, because I have my view and I need to take the tour, to go around, and when I'm faced with someone who has a different point of view or an opposite point of view, often it's not opposite, but just different. So either I reinforce my view or I change my mind. These are the two possibilities, but it's important to give ourselves this possibility, this opportunity. Often we have this tendency when there's conflict, we try to look for the one to blame. Have you ever seen two people fight? Two children who are fighting, and one child would say, "He started first." No, he hit me first. He said this to first. The point isn't about who started first or who is the one to blame. The point is about how we can now create harmony, dialogue, and peace. These are different things. Like if we go to see someone who acts with a certain amount of aggression, that action of that person came from nothing, or is it a manifestation of suffering that that person also lived? So I go there and I act with aggression. Okay, and I say, "You're the guilty one." I say, "Okay, yeah, well, I did that, but as a child, I lived this. I'm the victim." So who was the one to blame when you were a child? Oh, it was my father. Oh, and your father, why did he act like this? Because he actually had this and that other experience. How far back can we go? Practically to the infinite, to the beginningless time. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but the point isn't about who's to blame. Also, because I'm convinced that there is never one party to blame. There's a complexity of causes and results, and each one is responsible for their own causes. But the question isn't who's to blame, but what can we do now to pacify this conflict? What can we do to go towards peace? But I repeat what I've said many times. The macro helps us see the micro level, and the macro doesn't exist without the micro. We are not able to change the macro level like this. But seeing things that we don't agree with on that macro level, then it brings us to look at those micro things in our daily lives. How do I behave? In my life, what guidelines, what guardrails are important for me? I don't want to allow myself to get here, and so I need to protect myself. Like I remember once, Lama Michel Rinpoche, we went with someone who had a new house and invited Lama Ganshin to bless the house, and it was very high story. I remember the scene. There was a window that was quite low, and Lama Ganshin said to the person, "Be careful. Be careful with this very low window that you don't fall out." And the person was very offended. "Well, you're saying that I don't have attention enough, that I'm going to throw myself from this window, or I'm going to fall out this window?" And no, simply he was saying, protect yourself. I'm not saying that you're doing it now. It's like I come to you and I say, "Don't kill." You would say, "What? You think that I'm about to kill?" No, no. I'm saying certain stormy days, strong stormy days, one can get to the point that they want to kill. And for this, to make sure that this doesn't happen, you need to protect yourself first, beforehand. And this can be applied to everything, to not lying, to have a sexual misconduct, to not stealing. These are all aspects that are important because these are behaviors that just don't work out well. They're not they're not healthy. Maybe short term it seems like there's benefit, but mid and long term no. Like one of my masters, following the Tibetan culture of the past, which is not that different today. Let's say 2 generations ago, maybe 50, 60 years ago, the was the education only verbal, or was there also a physical component to education? From what I've seen today, all of those who were raised or who were being educated 50, 60 years ago, I think, some kind of spanking they received. It was absolutely normal. It was common. And then there was a change in view. Like, no, you can't hit children. But not too long ago, even less than 50 years ago, it was quite normal. And in the Tibetan culture, it was the same. When I went to India, it was strongly present, this some way of educating. And the Tibetan people, people didn't talk. People didn't talk too much. Someone made a mistake, and boom. And then sooner or later you understand. I imagine my masters, who had to raise like 20 children without parents. One educational tool that they used was actually the mala, and not for reciting mantras. And what would happen is that at a certain point in his life, he stopped completely to use any kind of physical violence. He did a kind of retreat. He actually burned the mala he had used to punish the children, and he took the vow to never use physical violence again, because he said that violence, physical punishment might work in the immediate, but creates a tremendous amount of resentment and and kind of pain that lasts. So he, had his 20 children that he needed to raise, and he tried to keep them all in line. And this is the tool that he had found. But at a certain point, he said, mid and long term, this is not the way. It actually does the opposite. And that's why it's important when we set our guardrails, we need to think about a path that bring benefit on a mid and long term, that bring benefit mid and long term. But we see that that's more tiresome. And in the vows of the Bodhisattva vows, for example, there's a point where it said that when we're faced with something that is short term, is tiresome, and is even unpleasant, but brings benefit mid and long term, then it's something we should do. When we find ourselves faced with something that is pleasurable short term, but that is harmful mid and long term, it's something that we should avoid. Or rather, this mid and long term is more important than this immediate result or near future. And it's important for us to have these guidelines for our conduct in general, within which we want to stay. These guidelines are not things that should be just said or thought about once. They need to be formalized. That's why we take vows in a government, in a country. These guidelines show up as, they manifest as laws. Laws are to structure society so that we all walk in the same direction. If we've left everyone to his own, it would be quite chaotic. So guidelines are given, even on a social level, and within, in our own lifestyle, in our own life. It's very important to have our own guidelines for our own personal conduct. And in Buddhism, in these vows are mostly divided into three types. There are others, but there are three main ones. They're the vows of personal liberation, pratimoksha vows, that look at the behavior that should be avoided because they are detrimental. Here we avoid killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, taking substances that take away my clarity and limit my own personal control over myself. It's like putting down beautiful white lines on the road, and I'm sure I'm sure to always have sunny days, but if I get drunk and I lose control of myself, um, it's just a sunny day, I'm on the road, but if I'm drunk, I can run off the road in the same way. That's why in Tibetan it said alcohol is the doorway that takes to all other non-virtuous actions. Because you can put down your guardrails, your white lines, but if you get drunk, you lose control. And when you lose control, internally, if you are within a perfect state of love and balance, nothing happens. There was one master, for example. This was actually quite recently. I knew this person, and he liked drinking alcohol. And he would drink a lot, actually. And sometimes, even during teachings, sometimes they would have to take him, they would help him down from the throne because he couldn't walk well. But what was particular was that the more drunk he was, the more so let's say the more he didn't have these inner guardrails, but being within a beautiful, balanced person, he would give marvelous, marvelous teachings. But the problem is that most of us, if we take away these guardrails, it's not that within we have such a beautiful reality. And we have beautiful parts, and we have also less beautiful parts, and taking away this losing control, these other virtuous aspects can come out. So these are things that we need to protect ourselves. So we have to understand the behavior that is beneficial and what is detrimental, and what is detrimental we should avoid. And this is part of the personal liberation vows. And there are many others that we can add. I'm sure that if we need to review all the vows, we should have vows also linked to social media. But what's important about this, without getting into what vow one should take, is looking at my physical and verbal and even mental, but starting from physical and verbal, the conduct, behavior. What of these is detrimental that I should avoid? And then one takes a vow. Then there are vows called bodhisattva vows. There are 18 main vows, and and 40 secondary vows. And and it starts from one vow, the main root vow of the Bodhisattva vows. And it's the only one that by breaking that one, you break all the Bodhisattva vows. It's so difficult. It's the vow to never abandon love towards all beings. And these vows are based on the principle that we're protecting ourselves from our own selfishness, recognizing that this obsession with self-gratification, our selfishness, is the main cause of our suffering in general. Even if we go and look at various conflicts that are happening, we can look for many external solutions, rightly so, but at the end of the day, I mean, where do these conflicts come from? They come from within. And if there is not a real attitude of respect, love, altruism, it's hard to resolve. So one needs to protect oneself from one's own selfishness. And so these are vows about seeing others, taking care of others. These are the vows of Bodhisattva, where we take the commitment to take care of others, to act with love, even if it's absolutely not spontaneous in that moment. But they give us these strong guardrails to protect ourselves from our own selfishness. It's interesting because someone who has already realized this, one doesn't need vows. I mean, the vows are necessary for those who have not realized these things. The vows are for those who still have stormy days. Those who see the road clearly has already gotten to where they need to go. They don't need vows. We take vows, those of us who are still taken by our attraction and our aversion and our selfishness. But once, when we see that this obsession with self-gratification is so harmful, and and like taking care of others is only beneficial, and this is based on a feeling of altruism and love towards others, and goes against our own selfishness. And then the third type of vows are the tantric vows that have to do with a deeper level of conduct, looks at what are the necessary conditions, what prerequisites does one need to follow correctly the Vajrayana path. I take the commitment that soon we will look at the vows with more care, like the Bodhisattva vows, for example. But in conclusion, we cannot avoid all of these stormy, foggy days. We don't have this ability to avoid them completely. A foggy day is maybe a day where one is sad, a little depressed, one loses one's objectives, doesn't understand where he's going. But if today I'm here and I see the fog, I have the memory of the previous days where I saw clearly the lake, and those particular clear days where one could even see beyond the lake, where I've never seen. But it says here, in the mountains around us, on a very clear day, you can actually even see the Madonnina of the Duomo of Milan. We do have memory of clear days like that. So even if today it's foggy and I can't see far, I have the memory of the view of the lake, of the mountains, of the beyond. And I keep that because I need that so that I keep myself on the road. And on the days we're really taken by strong emotions, we need to have this memory and a clear idea of what we should do and what we shouldn't do. So when it's a sunny day, it's wonderful to enjoy the sun. But those are the days where we should set those guardrails, right, to paint those white lines on the road, because we need these guidelines, we need this support to protect ourselves. Sometimes when we have bad days, stormy days, it won't be easy to stay on the road, even when we see clearly the white lines. And sometimes we actually have this tendency that we want to even take away the guardrails. We we think that those guardrails are um, they're not there to protect us, but that they're limiting us. So it's very important to reinforce these protective barriers, these guardrails. And I'm talking mostly about our micro level of existence, our individual, our personal conduct. That naturally that reflects upon the macro level. But when we look at the macros, when we're only looking at the macro, pointing a finger, I mean, it doesn't. It's not useful. We need to look within, and we should ask ourselves how we can be part of a solution so that our interdependence is is um, an important aspect of the solution. Time for our dedications. At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to obtain all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Trashidele, have a lovely day, everyone.